Ladies and gentlemen, it's a weekend and I don't usually do videos from home, but I must be honest to say this specific news article that has come out, or the news that has come out, is so revolting, but so synoptic of the ANC that just have to do a video on it. And this is the video that the Mandela Foundation is being weaponized for anti-Jewish propaganda. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the name Nelson Mandela carries a degree of moral weight across the globe. I mean, obviously, the name is one synopsis with reconciliation, justice, and peaceful dismantling of racial oppression. I mean, that's how everybody views the name. And today, that moral authority is being cynically co-opted by the ANC-aligned elites and their activists to lend credibility to radically anti-Israel and at times outright anti-Semitic campaigns. And we're going to talk about all of these. Now, the Nelson Mandela Foundation has increasingly blurred the lines between progressive activism and political indoctrination over the years, especially around Israeli-Palestinian affairs, if you want to call it that. Now, they've recently published what they call a proposal for Solidarity in Action Awards. Now, what is this proposal for Solidarity in Action Awards? Well, it openly invites submissions that challenge dominant global power relations. So basically, it's propaganda, right? It's inviting propaganda campaigns. But it's clear from the tone and the context that the dominant voice that they wish to include is against Zionism, the Jewish state, and its allies. Now, the foundation itself actually calls for a campaign against the delegitimization of Jewish self-determination, against basically the Israeli state. So they want to create some kind of legitimate policy or critique of the state of Israel in order to basically get it disbanded. I don't know how they feel they're going to do this. Now, the foundation has in the past obviously written articles such as an eye for an eyelash, which attempted to frame Israel's military operation following the October 7th Hamas massacre as being nothing more than revenge and not self-defense. According to the foundation, any Jew that's in Israel should be classed as settler colonialism, as a form of apartheid, as a form of genocide. And really what they want to do is to demonize Israel and by extension its Jewish identity. Now, these narratives aren't just really around Palestine, and they reinforce classical anti-Semitic tropes such as Jews are powerful manipulators behind Western imperialism, because according to them, that's what Western imperialism is, just Jews in action. And Israel is the embodiment of white colonial oppression. This is what they're trying to push forward with Nelson Mandela's foundation. Now, this shouldn't actually come as a surprise because Nelson Mandela's grandson, Noxy Mandela, is, again, also one of these radical Islamists. Now, once upon a time, very sane, reasonable person, married an Islamist, became an Islamist, and would you know it, he now issues many inflammatory statements calling Israel a genocidal apartheid state. He praises terror groups like Hamas, Hezbollah, and Islamic Jihad as heroes of resistance. He uses the sanctity of the Mandela name to draw legitimacy to any of his statements and calls for the defeat of the Zionist entity and supports Iranian allied militias. He even quotes Nelson Mandela's pro-Palestinian rhetoric out of context, in many instances out of context, and stripping it of its original peaceful coexistence narrative. All this in a bid to, well, basically class everybody else as being anti-white Western imperialists. Then would you know it, you know who else is the chairperson of the Nelson Mandela Foundation? Nalandi Pandor. Yep, she comes as a surprise to nobody. Who strongly aligns South Africa's foreign policy with Iran, the Palestinian Authority, and anti-Israeli rhetoric. Now, she uses Islamic phrasing and solidarity language in state-sponsored statements, and we see this quite a lot. In her time in Durka is like very much preoccupied with, should we call it, Islamic issues. And a lot of this traces its origin from Nalandi Pandor, a well-known Muslim. Now, Nalandi Pandor has refused to condemn Hamas following the October 7th massacre and instead hosted Hamas leaders in Pretoria. She is also featured prominently on the Nelson Mandela Foundation's website, which blurs the lines between Mandela's vision and an Islamist-aligned foreign policy. But again, this is what we're seeing now with the ANC. They care little of Mandela's legacy, and they will happily use it and co-opt it into their own little pet projects. Now, very interestingly, the actual Nelson Mandela Foundation has been very silent on the radical anti-Semitic rhetoric by the grandson of Nelson Mandela. Instead, as you can see here, it focuses on these progressive PR campaigns, which are basically propaganda like Solidarity in Action Awards, claiming to promote justice, whilst ignoring real hate speech under its own banners by its own grandson, if you will. The Mandela name now is nothing more than a political tool used to launch extremist and anti-Semitic ideologies under the guise of freedom and justice. ANC's leadership from Nalandi Pandor to Noxy Mandela, the grandson of Nelson Mandela, demonstrates a complete lack of regard for the legacy they claim to represent. Their silence in support of Hamas and the Iranian proxies emboldens hatred and damages South Africa's international reputation. And it's not to say that Israel is perfect in what it's doing in Palestine. But you do have to be careful around blurring your own political ideologies and your own intents, your own political goals, with any form of political legacy that's distinct to South Africa as a whole. Nelson Mandela stood for peace, dialogue, and mutual respect, terrorism and anti-Semitism, not ideological warfare. And it's quite shameful that yet again we see examples of the ANC hijacking his name for political gain, because that's what's happening now. You see, you say, oh, the Nelson Mandela Foundation. It's like, oh, sanctity, like this saintly figure comes out the skies. And then anything you say is just kind of like accepted as like, it must be good. South Africa isn't a predominantly Muslim country. Why is it that Islamists have taken control over the levers of power? And it's closely aligned with the actual leaders of the ANC themselves. Yet again, it's just another example of the ANC being deeply, just ideologically sick. This is not a good political party. It's no longer just in the realms of political rent-seeking. It's just ideologically sick and full of hate. And I don't know how you can actually reason or rationalize with these individuals anymore. Anyway, that's just my views. Do let me know what you think in the comment section below. Until next time, bye.